is a demonstration of the Proof of Concept International Patient Summary functionality referred to as IPS. IPS is a summary of health information that can follow a patient across borders so that it can be shared with healthcare workers and providers abroad. It supports safe care abroad when patients are treated by providers that have no medical history of the patient. The IPS process includes 3 stages. 1. Patient authentication. 2. Creating and curating the IPS. And 3. Consuming the IPS. Each stage uses services and applications developed using internationally recognised healthcare interoperability standards, specifically FHIR. The IPS creation starts with a patient logging into an application that holds or displays their medical records. In this instance, we are using an application called Helm. Helm is an open-source, FHIR-compliant, patient-held healthcare record app. However, any similar FHIR-compliant app or service can also be used to create IPS records. To access Helm, patients must first verify their identity. In this case, they can do so using the NHS login service. Helm user authentication can also be done using other OIDC providers, but for now, I will demonstrate the authentication process using this particular service. To begin, I will enter the patient's registered email address, followed by their password, and then finally a one-time access code that has been sent to the patient's mobile device. Once the patient has been successfully authenticated, the Helm loading screen is shown. During this time, the app fetches the patient's medical records and other health and social care data associated with the patient. What we can see here is the Helm homepage. One of the features of Helm is called What Matters to Me, and this allows patients to record information about themselves that they think is important to share with healthcare professionals. Data like this is often not collected in other electronic medical record systems. To create the IPS, the patient clicks on the Share Medical Record button. The patient then accesses and views their medical record information, and this is the first step of creating the IPS. In this instance, the patient is presented with an extract of their primary care information that is drawn from a national system in England using FHIR-compliant APIs. The patient can view their conditions, allergies, current and recent medications, and also recent pathology results. Medical record information like this can come from any system that can expose data over a FHIR API. This means that the IPS source data could be extracted and aggregated from different systems. The data could then be displayed as a combined view of medical records, essentially a longitudinal patient record. Once the patient has reviewed their medical record, they can then move on to the next step, which allows them to create their own free text notes. These free text notes could also be included in the IPS. Before the IPS creation is complete, the patient reviews their contact details. These details will be used to receive a confirmation email and access notifications via SMS. These details would normally be pre-populated, but as we are using a test patient, we'll have to enter them manually. The final step is confirming the acceptance of the IPS terms and conditions. Once happy, The IPS creation is completed by clicking the Share Record button. The IPS services have generated a QR code which is presented here. This QR code is also sent to the patient's email address. Behind the scenes, the IPS services are busy pulling together data from both the patient's medical record and Helm using each system's FHIR API. Once the generation process is completed, the patient receives a confirmation email. As you can see here, the email contains a QR code and also a PDF. Excuse me. The PDF can be stored on a mobile device and accessed when needed. This is helpful, for instance, in places where there may not be any internet connectivity. The email also contains a link that the patient can click to view their own IPS. To access the IPS, the patient needs to be authenticated. This is done by entering the access code that has been sent to the patient's mobile or cell phone. Once the access code is verified, the patient is presented with their IPS record. The flag here indicates the country where the patient's medical records are held, and the logo here indicates the governing healthcare authority for that country. This is a rendering of the IPS FHIR composition resource. The IPS contains patient entered information, such as what matters to me and the free text notes that we saw, alongside their medical record information. These top two sections are not part of the IPS standard. However, they could be added to it to provide perhaps a richer record. As well as saving the PDF version of the IPS, the patient can also choose to add a digital pass version to a capable Apple or Android device. As I'm using an Apple iPhone for this demonstration, I will show the steps that a patient with a similar device would follow. Again, I enter my one-time access code. And then download the pass to my wallet. Once I've completed those steps, I can then access the pass on my wallet. Here it is. To share the IPS with a healthcare professional, the patient can show the healthcare professional the QR code. The QR code can then be scanned on the healthcare professional's mobile device, at which they will be then taken to a form where they fill out an access request. The access request consists of the healthcare professional's preferred language, their first and last name, the healthcare organisation where they work, and finally their email address. Excuse me. I will enter a fictional healthcare professional to demonstrate the process. Once I've completed all the details, I click Continue. In doing so, I am taken to a holding page where I must wait for the patient to authorise my request. In the meantime, the patient has received that access request on their mobile or cell via an SMS text message. To grant access, the patient simply replies with the surname of the healthcare professional, followed by yes. Now, going back to the awaiting authorization screen, we can see the IPS services have received that authorization request and access has been granted. The IPS is displayed in English because this English was the chosen language by this particular healthcare professional. The IPS is capable of displaying SNOMED coded terms in different languages when a translation is available, however. By default, the English terminology is always displayed. Each time the IPS record is accessed, the patient receives an SMS notification allowing them to track who accessed their record. You can see here that the SMS contains the name of the person who accessed the record and the date and time. Finally, as the IPS is ultimately a FHIR resource, it can be retrieved from a FHIR-capable server using a fairly simple FHIR API search interaction as shown here. Here we see the API call and the resource returned. As you can see, the resource returned is a composition, a bundle of type document that contains the composition resource, in addition to all of the composite parts that we have seen rendered on screen. The free text information has been captured in the generated text property of the composition resource and is available towards the end of this line. That brings us to the end of this demonstration. Thank you for watching.